Schizophrenics of Reddit, what is the scariest hallucination, visually or audibly, that you have ever experienced? My mom worked at a placement home for high-functioning mentally ill people. Occasionally, they would go off their meds and start the cycle down into their illness again. One woman called screaming because there were demons in her shoes. If she put her shoes on, they would crawl into her feet by going under her toenails and then invade her body from the legs up. Schizophrenics will sometimes apply delusional thinking to somatic experiences they are having. Somebody else mentioned athlete's foot, and I think that is highly likely. I once treated a schizophrenic with athlete's foot who was convinced invisible nurses were sneaking into his room and sticking him with needles between his toes to drive him crazy. Schizoaffective. Bipolar subtype. It's not a specific hallucination, but sometimes I have very vivid memories of things that didn't happen, and they make me second guess every single thing that I can remember or know, because if my memory failed me once, why wouldn't it fail me twice? And then everything spirals downwards. Edit, I simply can't see the more recent comments. If you have any questions, DM me. My GF sex roommate was the same. A lot of times he asked her if some conversations actually happened. He also imagined that we broke up because of him and things like that. I often heard him talking in the kitchen when he was cooking all by himself. Do you know if this is also the case for you? Wish you all the best. I'm prone to occasional psychotic episodes. No formal diagnosis has been made to include this. I have previously been diagnosed with BPD, but it's not really common to have episodes of psychosis with BPD, so I'm waiting to be re-evaluated. I was admitted to the crisis ward in November because I was 100% convinced my whole body was rotting from the inside out. I was decomposing from within, and it was spreading outward to my extremities. This was terrifying for me. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because no one believed me that I was decomposing. No one saw it as an issue. And realizing that my reality is not reality was so traumatic and isolating. I'm really not looking forward to the next inevitable episode. I've never had psychotic episodes, but I'm bipolar and I've had anxiety attacks where I'm absolutely convinced my heart is giving out and I'm on the verge of death. It's not quite as extreme as rotting, but I think the thought and sensation of serious physical ailments is quite common with panic disorder. I'm not schizophrenic, but I get psychotic episodes. My hallucinations tend to stick to one sense, but sometimes kind of bleed into each other. I often hallucinate bugs on surfaces that aren't there, as I try to squish them without anything happening. I suppose the scariest one was a body lying on the floor of my bedroom, and it was wheezing, for me. Each sense has a different impact when I hallucinate something. Hearing something is extremely distracting and annoying but isn't scary anymore. Seeing something usually spikes my fear response, as well as tactile hallucinations. Thank God it's never happened before that a hallucination was occupying all of my senses at the same time. I'm not sure if I could handle that. Anyway, thanks for asking. I usually don't get to talk about these things, and it does help. Anyway, thanks for asking. I usually don't get to talk about these things, and it does help. I would love to read more, if you're willing to share. Blank. Fortunately, the scariest I've ever had is just people calling my name from another room when I know I'm the only person in the house. My audible hallucinations don't have a great vocabulary, and most of the time just sound like someone doing jazz scat, which is kind of annoying and makes it hard to sleep. Visually, I'll sometimes see people standing in windows who aren't there on a second glance, or small shadows darting around like mice. I'm extremely fortunate that my symptoms are relatively mild. Edit, I've responded to as many questions as I can, but now I need to sleep. Sorry if I didn't get around to responding to you. /u/dieselite. Sorry dude. However, is it really good scat? I have psychosis and it usually is worst when I'm alone or at night. Doubly so if I'm alone at night. When I was house training my puppy, I had him outside at 3 AM. And I saw what looked like the KKK and some witches having a seance. I then heard whispers mentioning killing and saw the group start walking up the street towards my house. Thankfully, that's the worst it's ever been. I do still have minor fleeting hallucinations when I'm stressed, but it's more like seeing a shadow out of the corner of my eye and is much easier to ignore. Does having an animal around help the way having another person around does? This guy, https link is certainly up there. Your link sent me looking through the top posts of r/schizophrenia, and it made me think of something. If you are hallucinating, do you ever see things on your phone? Like you're looking at an image on your phone and you see something in it? Or are your hallucinations usually in the environment you're in? Sorry if it's a troubling question. I'm just a curious person. One of the veins in my eye was actually a worm that was eating my brain, and that's why I had headaches. Also, random sharp pains and itches, bugs crawling all over my skin, trapped in my shoes, etc. I double check my shoes every time I put them on with a flashlight, but still have to take them off occasionally to check. I always check the insides of shoes before wearing them. 3 reasons. 1. Toy Story, I got a snake in my boot. I'm almost 30. 2. I once put a boot on and there was a furry caterpillar inside. 3. I read once that you should always knock your boots out because scorpions like to crawl inside. I live nowhere near scorpions. Brother is schizophrenic and had insane hallucinations for about a year before I could get him help. He constantly believed people were assaulting him, trying to rape him, and trying to kill him. On one occasion he ran so long to get away from them, he was admitted into the hospital for heat exhaustion. He didn't understand why we wouldn't help him and would lash out at us. He's now severely medicated and nowhere near the person he once was. Is he still having hallucinations on whichever drug he's on? If not, he might be overly medicated like I originally was. Edit. Forgot a word, and if you or anyone reading this wants more info about my experience, PM me. Ems. I had a patient with schizophrenia. Full visual and auditory hallucinations. Off of his meds and screaming in public. Demons were coming out of the ground trying to grab him. They were yelling at him various obscene things. Weird part was that once we are on scene, he calmed down and recognized the uniforms. Fully cooperative. But that was an interesting patient history. Are you having hallucinations? Yup. Describes them in detail. So how are you so calm right now? This is normal when I'm off my meds and I know I'm in an ambulance. This was normal for him. Edit. Word change. You'd think he'd take his meds. Schizoaffective disorder here. But that's close enough, I think. Most of the time my hallucinations are pretty mundane, but I do recall a few extreme ones. Worst of all would have to have been the time I was convinced I was being abducted by aliens. I was in bed and staring at the ceiling when a bright light appeared like a circle above me, and I felt like I was being raised up into the air from a center point in my chest. I could see shadowy figures gathered all around the bed looking at me being lifted, and they were all whispering. But the whispers gradually grew louder until it was like the sound of wind. But I somehow snapped back into reality. Very frightened but obviously unscathed. That had to have been the most intense hallucination I've had in my life. Sometimes I've been known to talk to apparently disturbing things that aren't there, but I have dissociative amnesia and don't often remember doing so. That's all filled in by people I know who have observed me. Though I never really know if they are telling me the truth, which does bug me a lot. I have a lot of paranoia surrounding people telling me what I've done in dissociative episodes and them just lying to me to get me to think a certain way about myself or something. I don't know. It's rough never being sure of anything. Somebody I knew back in high school had schizophrenia, but was taking medication for it. She accidentally skipped a dose once, and she came to school hysterical that she didn't want to go back home because she heard someone chewing human meat under her bed. Human meat? How does one even know what that sounds like? The same way you just know things in dreams. In ways that don't make sense in the waking world. You mistake schizophrenia for being like reality. In reality, you hear a noise, then recognize what it is or figure out what it is. In schizophrenia, hallucinations are spontaneous knowledge that come all at once. You know what you are hearing and its implication. It's not like you hear a knock and use deductive reasoning to figure out it's a person buried between your walls. You simply know that there is a dead person in the walls knocking on them, trying to come out. My friend in college was schizophrenic. We were once hanging out in his dorm room at night, maybe 11 PM midnight. And he got up to go to the bathroom. He opened the door and stopped, staring at the empty hallway. He asked me to come to the door and tell him if something seemed weird. I walk up to the door and see nothing strange in the hall and tell him so. He asks me if I can hear something. I say no. He said he heard muffled crying or arguing or something coming from down the hall. And he saw a pitch black hallway when it was actually fully lit. He said the hall was black, not just dark or dimly lit. At this point he is shaking, and I'm terrified because I don't know he's sick. We are both on the verge of tears. I'm not even sure he knew he was sick at the time. I ended up walking him to the bathroom and then spending the night in his room because he could still hear someone crying in the hall. I thought for the longest time he was pulling my leg. But he ended up going to therapy and getting on meds very shortly after that night. So it was a terrifying and very real moment for him too. You're a good friend. Primarily auditory hallucinations here. Once experienced the onset of an episode during which one of my familiar voices died violently, cried for help through direct interaction with me, and continued to let out tortured cries the entire time until I was heavily sedated. Came to approximately a day later, and I haven't heard from him since. I've experienced darker and objectively more disturbing content from them. But hearing one of them cry for help as it passed was one of the hardest hallucinations I've experienced. Edit, I'm schizophrenic. Edit, also thanks for the feedback and positivity. Guys. First time really sharing this aspect of myself to this community. Also, part of me wanted to share. Watch out for the typical stigma of mixing schizophrenia with multiple personalities or personality disorders. I understand, but want to support each case and each condition as its own for what it is. Also shout out to crime shows and dramas for portraying every schizophrenic as meek and ready to snap into a murderous personality. Those coping with schizophrenia aren't always trying to fight back demon possession or the urge to stab people on a bus. Most of us just want some peace and quiet and a cigarette. Or to not want a cigarette. Or coffee. We're big on coffee. My best friend is schizophrenic. I was chatting with him on a skateboard break on the north side of Milwaukee. He flinched suddenly. Really hard. Later told me he saw a man run up on me with a hatchet and slice me to pieces. Can you ask him how real the hallucinations look? If you enjoyed this video then hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more future videos.